What up, Fightful fam, and welcome to 1-2 Punch. Player 1, Shakiel Mahjouri. Player 2, Marcus the Rebel, Rebelo. Sorry, I didn't plan this one today. Rebellious because you were late on the start time, but we made it to the show at 2:15 Eastern, 11:15 a.m. Pacific, as intended. Marcus, long time no see, man. How's everything on the East Coast of Canada?
Great, man. All things considered, obviously, with the world situation right now, it's pretty much, touch and go with everyone, but making the best out of the situation and just trying to get outdoors as the weather gets back up here and gets a lot better.
All right. If your Twitter bio is up to date, you are a associate producer over at CBC Sports. Still
Yep.
correct?
Yeah, that's still correct.
Good, man. Glad to see everything's chugging along there. Guys, welcome to 1-2 Punch. This is our Fightful Select Patreon exclusive podcast, but we like to throw it out there for everyone on YouTube and beyond, free on the pay-per-view weeks. And while there is no UFC pay-per-view this Saturday, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you stand, there is a boxing pay-per-view, Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. We're going to get to all of it. For those unfamiliar with the program and the format, it's 1-2 Punch. We assign the biggest winners and losers of the week. Doesn't mean we're calling you a loser, unless you're Jake Paul. Maybe we are. We'll see. But it's just all in the spirit of good fun, not to be taken too seriously. I will hit this animated intro. Boom. Shout out to the special effects team. Okay, guys, quick reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, leave a thumbs up. All those little acts go a really long way to fueling the program. If you like what we're doing here, you can hop over at Fightful Select, get this every week, plus a ton of exclusive pro wrestling content if that's your cup of tea. From Sean Ross Sapp, we'd very much appreciate that. Leave a super chat donation, hit us up in the live chat since we're free and everywhere today. Love to engage with you guys. Another great way to help us out, and it lets me know the stream is running smoothly. I don't have to put my ear to my headphones like an idiot. That's enough of me shilling myself out. Let's do it. Okay, first and foremost, let's start on the winner's end because we do have a lot of losers to hit on. Fortunate week for Conor McGregor. There's some sort of, I think it was a sexual misconduct case against him, dropped. Not enough evidence. And on the same end, well, there's probably not a whole lot to say about that, considering there wasn't much evidence to support it. I am excited for Conor because not only do we have UFC 264 officially booked, but there's a little bit of spice to it. There's just enough edge where we're not talking about racist punching old men Conor McGregor, but we're talking about a Conor McGregor who's a little pissed off at Dustin Poirier right now, has this recent beef over the whole foundation charity debacle that we're going to get to a little bit later. Are you a little more excited for this fight now than you perhaps were when the idea of an immediate rematch was first proposed?
I mean, yes, of course, obviously. I think in general, I think for most fight fans, the excitement level will go up a little bit, maybe a lot for some others, and especially those who are Conor McGregor fans and supporters. But definitely, it definitely piques your interest a lot more. I mean, the idea of a trilogy fight was kind of seen before as a little bit of Dustin kind of taking that payday and taking that. I wouldn't call it easy money. I don't think that's the right term to use, but just taking, some guaranteed money and to gain more notoriety and more eyeballs on himself through, the mainstream. Not that he isn't already because he beat Conor McGregor, but just kind of amplifying that even more. So to have him and Conor kind of have this back and forth in regards to their charity, I mean, just draws even more interest and draws even more debate as to what kind of Conor we're seeing. Because we kind of saw Conor that was a lot more calm, a lot more poised during fight week, where he necessarily wasn't getting into the banter with his opponent. And now we're kind of seeing that revert kind of to the old Conor, so to speak, where we, see that Mystic Mac sort of persona come back into his fight weeks and to his fight camps.
Yeah, I think for me, the most confusing thing about Conor McGregor is that while he is a supremely confident person, you get such a different side of his personality from fight to fight that I'm not sure if he knows what the best approach is for him, right? Like you have one on his come up, you've got Mystic Mac, very cool, calm, collected, charismatic, and that's the guy who made it all the way to the world title. But then you see brushes like against the second Nate Diaz fight, a lot more reserved, against Dustin Poirier, a lot more reserved, against Habib, like if not literally, figuratively coked out. Um, it sometimes concerns me when fighters feel like they have to make such robust changes into not just their preparation but their personality to sort of persevere through the harder moments of the sport. I'm not sure. It kind of like John Jones. Like, I'm never quite sure if I know who Conor McGregor actually is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. It definitely varies between fight to fight, and I think based on opponent, right, and based on the mood and kind of tone that the opponent has set, right? With Nate in between the first and the second one, after Nate kind of got that one up on him, you kind of saw a little bit more of, like you said, a little bit more laid back, not necessarily a laid back Connor, but a little bit more calm, cool, that cold killer Connor kind of come out. And now with Dustin, we're kind of seeing that again, that evolution where you had the first one where there was so much bad blood. Dustin, there's that video that kept rolling over and over again from Fight Week behind the scenes of him kind of saying how much he had so much disdain for Connor, right? That he genuinely did not like Connor.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that second fight, you kind of saw a little bit more of a reserved nature from Dustin, and same thing from Connor. And now again, we're going, it kind of changes. It varies from camp to camp, and you just never know what you're going to get. And I think that's what kind of adds to the aura or the intrigue of Conor McGregor and his fandom, is that you never know what you're going to get. He's sort of like a loose cannon, so to speak, as we all know. So I think that definitely adds an added interest and bonus and excitement for that fight that might have not been there originally when the trilogy fight was proposed or announced.
I'm going to go to the live chat real quick. There's a statement here about Jake Paul allegations, which I can't prove, so I'm not going to answer that one. But Joseph Boza chimes in, Dustin fell for Conor's trap, and this is all a publicity stunt. UFC 257 did 1.6 million buys because the card was good on paper. And honestly, the card wasn't that good outside of the main event. I seem to remember the co-main down being a little disappointing. This one's looking way better with Gilbert Burns, Stephen Thompson on the card. On paper, UFC 264 isn't that good, so that's where him and I sort of disagree. But, no, I'm sorry. UFC 257, what am I talking about? We had Michael Chandler, Dan Hooker on the card. I think I'm mixing it up with whatever the recent Kamaru Usman Gilbert Burns card was that had, barely ranked women's strawweights in the go-main. If it gets 1 million, it's a success. Yeah, I think without a doubt this is going to crack 1 million easily, because for the casual audience who perhaps wasn't as conscious of Dustin Poirier on his come-up, dude, Dustin Poirier did the media tour after that fight. He was on Hot Ones. He was on everything. You now have what appears to be a bit of a grudge. You have a foil to Conor McGregor that the general public is more aware of. I think this is probably going to exceed UFC 257.
Yeah, and I think the added intrigue or added point of interest there is the charity aspect. The fact that it has something to do with charity. The fact that you're kind of playing with, I wouldn't call it people's livelihoods, but the general welfare of a group or of a certain a stature. To have that kind of added intrigue there with Dustin and all the work that he's done with his Good Fight Foundation, to kind of have him go at Conor and say, I haven't heard from your team and what's going on here, and for Conor to kind of get all that praise that he did get, and rightfully so, the fact that he was going to donate some of his purse to that foundation, the fact that he was going to do that, and now he's kind of pulling back on that, kind of adds to, I guess, the intrigue again for a casual person. When you hear a story like that of someone, anytime you hear something sort of with charity or that word scandal automatically gets attached to it, and then boom, right away you're going to draw more interest.
So let's touch on that real quick. What did you make of these allegations? So I haven't dug too deep into it, but the general timeline, Conor McGregor takes a dig at Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier comes back and accuses Conor and his team of not sending over the money that was promised to his Good Fight Foundation, as well as just entirely ignoring emails from Dustin's team. Conor comes back and says that they vet all the people they donate to, and that Dustin's team was not being forthcoming with what the money would go towards. Where do you... And then at some point, Dustin kind of came out and apologized for even bringing it out into the public. Now, to me, that isn't a declaration that Dustin Poirier was wrong in the situation between the Good Fight Foundation and whoever was responsible for donating on behalf of Conor's team. Dustin Poirier has always been very sheltered about his finances. You see any time that Ariel Helwani or Mike Bonner, anyone asks Dustin, hey, are you making pay-per-view points of this? Hey, how much are you getting paid? Dustin just doesn't want to answer the question. So for me, I think it's more a professionalism thing. What do you think happened? I know it's impossible to know with the information we have presented to us, but where is the conflict here, or sort of the snag in the rope?
I think it's a case of my people will talk to your people. That there's just something got lost in the shuffle between the two camps, because when you're at the level of Conor McGregor and you're at, his stature in terms of earnings, you're gonna have a lot of people, dealing with your money essentially, right? You're gonna have a lot of advisors, whether it's, financial, whether it's on the business side, whatever that may be. I think there was a lot of people in Connor's camp and it might have got lost in that shuffle, or there were a lot of people in Dustin's camp. Obviously Dustin, it's his foundation, it's under his name, the Good Fight Foundation, but he obviously can't do that alone. And there's probably a lot of people in his corner, in his camp, that deal with that sort of thing. And like he said, originally in his original statement, that his team reached out to Connor's team. So it's two teams dealing with each other. It's not fighter to fighter. It's not Connor going directly or Dustin going directly to Connor. So I think that's where the kind of, I would call it a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, because obviously we don't know the facts like yourself. I don't know the exact details. I'm not, immersed into that world. So, or in the dealings. So in terms of what exactly happened, I don't think we'll ever know, but I just think it was a case of, my people will call your people, and, there's some sort of broken communication there. Yeah.
All right, next up on the winners end, I gotta say, I think that this whole Jake Paul Ben Askren buildup has been huge for Ben Askren. Now, he took the fight initially looking at it as sort of an easy payday, a reason to get into shape, wasn't thinking too much beyond that. And it's funny because he's such a charismatic, social, witty guy, really made for this sort of intersect between sport and entertainment that is mixed martial arts. But we were doing a virtual media day with him, and he repeated that he doesn't like this attention. He doesn't want to be asked for photographs. He doesn't really he just kind of wants to coach his wrestling team and do his podcast and let it be. Because I asked him after many technical difficulties, when you look at the numbers, his appearance on Logan Paul is probably one of the top 15 episodes of Impulsive ever. At the time I was looking at it, was the third most Food Truck Diaries, and I'm pretty sure by now it's surpassed Jorge Masvidal, just behind Israel Adesanya. People really care about Ben Askren right now. Every day, Ariel Helwani pointed out that it appears he's getting a new sponsorship deal every day. Looking back on how he started with this whole craziness to where we are now, how big of a boost has this been for Ben Askren's business and profile, at least until we see the result?
I think it's more than he wants to admit, especially in terms of, the way the MMA community has rallied around him, even though he has come out and said that that's not necessarily what he wants or what he's interested in. So in terms of the personal side and the fandom side, I think obviously for Ben, the whole MMA community is sort of rallied around him, or at least the majority of them, other than Jorge Masvidal, has sort of rallied around him and wanted him to, represent, because he is a representation of the sport. As much as he might not want to admit it, he's Ben Askren, the MMA fighter. Ben Askren, a former Olympic wrestler. Ben Askren is a representative of, mixed martial arts and the martial arts community. So whether he wants to downplay that or not, I think that's a huge reason. In terms of the business side, obviously, when you're fighting someone like Jake Paul, who, whether we like to admit it or not, does bring a lot of eyeballs to the sport of boxing, does draw on a lot of numbers. Where that's coming from, that's still up for debate, whether in terms of demographic and the audience. But in terms of that, Ben Askren obviously is going to see a huge increase, and he will continue to, unless obviously something dramatic and, it just goes terrible for him on Saturday, much like it did for Nate Robinson. But I still think in terms of both his personal side and his business side, it's definitely a big win for him, like you said.
Okay, are there any other big winners for the week you'd like to highlight before we move on to the losers portion of this third way mark of the show?
In terms of big winners for the week, I think we pretty much covered it all. You have Ben
kind of
Askren.
A slow week, weirdly enough, despite some of the big names popping up.
It was a little bit of a slow week. We did have, obviously, we have a UFC card coming up this weekend as well.
We'll get to,
and Kevin Gastelum, and exactly, we'll get to that. So In terms of winners from the Jake Paul or Ben Askren side, I think we've pretty much covered it there.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's move on to the losers, and we're gonna stay on the Jake Paul bandwagon. Allegations come out earlier this week accusing him of sexually assaulting a TikTok star. I can't remember the timeline about this, but it was apparently at a studio that he owns, or they went into his room. Some things happened that allegedly should not have happened. Now, let me start by saying, when stories like this come out, while I may personally have an impulse as to what is true and what is not, I think it's very important to maintain some degree of neutrality. And that's not to say, oh, I don't know who to believe, so much as it is, okay, serious allegations, let's start figuring out what the truth is. Does it bother you as much as it bothers me when you look online and there's just swarms of people either saying Jake Paul did it, or even worse, no, equally bad. Either Jake Paul did it, or, oh, this girl is lying, oh, this girl just wants attention, oh, this girl's trying to boost her business. Like, do you wish that people had the common sense to just take things seriously, look into them, and hopefully let the truth reveal itself?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of become numb to that sort of dialogue when something like this happens. It's just something we see now all the time. So it's kind of hard for me to get, really upset and bothered by it. Not that it doesn't. And I think it's also, it comes from, a journalistic background as well. It's not to say that journalists, are right all the time, or, always act in an appropriate manner. But, when you are in that journalism sphere, you have to act on not necessarily neutrality, like you said, but you have to get all the facts, because that's what your job is. Your job is to report the facts. Obviously, you can interject with your opinion and, in certain forms and different forms of media, but you need to, get all the facts and establish all the facts before kind of coming out with that. So, yeah, in terms of it bothering me, it doesn't bother me as much as it used to. I'm going to be honest, because it's just something
That's the nature of the job.
to, and it happens. It's a part of the job, like you said, and it's what we see all the time now. But yeah, I definitely, obviously, we want to have all the facts, because on one side we have serious allegations against them, and if they are proven to be true, that's just terrible and horrible in the most insane way you can ever imagine, right? Like, nobody should ever have to go through that, whether you're any walk of life, or in any specific gender. And on the other side, if it's untrue, then you're talking about not only just killing someone's reputation and career, but that's a human being, right? And when you have, not to say that those allegations are false, but if they were to come out false, then you have, what I mean, some serious damage on the other side. And Jake Paul has gone in the offensive with that, rhetoric.
Yeah, I didn't love his statement, and we'll get to it in a second. I do want to go to the live chat real quick. Judas Donas chimes in asking, why was this on my notifications? Because it's a damn good podcast, and if you want it every week, head over to FightfulSelect.com. And one SSS says, I miss you, Shaq, ever since it became an exclusive. Miss you too, but dude, it's like $5. We're in a pandemic. What else are you spending your money on? Go support it. Makes a good look for me on the boss. Appreciate it. A terrible time to interject with that, but I did it nonetheless. It's my show. I want to just touch very quickly on how this allegation ties into the fight. So obviously, a really big element of what detractors of the alleged victim are going to use is, oh, why is she bringing it up now, the week of his fight? And, she may say now is when she felt comfortable, whatever the case may be. I think there's a very strong possibility, and we've seen this happen many times, that it was done now because if this alleged crime did occur, perhaps enough time has passed where she now feels more comfortable coming out with it. But furthermore, because this is the week that the most people are going to be talking about Jake Paul, and while the detractors are going to say, oh, look at you using it as clout, bringing this up now. If you want to bring to light someone who allegedly did harm to you, the best time to do it is when everyone is talking about that person. I don't think that's inherently malicious if these allegations are true. It's just intelligent. Like, why would you bring this up when no one cares about the person? If you really want to get back at this person or bring them to justice, you're going to do it when everyone cares about what's going on with them, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's, again, that's sort of the frustrating part about, when something like this comes about is because, you have a lot of people jumping on saying, why now? Why this time? Why that time? Me, you, everybody, we will never know. We're not mind. We can't know what someone is feeling at that particular moment or in that particular time of their life. Everyone is different. Everyone's going to, have different coping mechanisms and different ways they go about things. So if the, alleged victim felt comfortable coming out at this time or felt like it was the right thing to do to come out at this time, then who are we to question that? You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I stand on that is, yes, obviously you're going to have those people on the other side that support Jake Paul and that say, hey, like, why now? Why this time? Why that time? The frustrating part is we will never know why. You don't know what someone is thinking. You don't know how someone is feeling. So the best option is to just, again, like we discussed earlier when we first brought up the subject, is to just let the facts come out. As as tough as it is to say sometimes, you just have to let the facts come out and see how everything plays out, and then we can all formulate our own opinions, and truth will eventually come out.
I do want to. Are there any other losers that stick out in your mind this week? Again, it's been a relatively mild week in the world of MMA.
No, I mean, other than Jake Paul and what's transpired over the last week, I don't think there's much in terms of losers. Again, Jake Paul and Ben Askren has kind of dominated this fight week as
It
much as we
really
don't want
has.
to admit it.
Oh man, I mean, if you want to talk about a loser, I was on the press conference for or the media day yesterday, and I don't know what was going on. I've never experienced this tech issue with Zoom. I don't think it was on my end because I ran my tests. Everything else I was functioning with was working super smooth. I don't think it was on Triller's end either because it appeared the other media taking part in questions didn't have this issue. But for whatever reason, not only was there like a 30-second delay between me and what was actually going on, there was also like a 15-second delay between the video and the audio. So they unmute my mic so I can ask Ben a question. And by the time he stops talking and is ready for my question, apparently he had stopped talking like 30 seconds ago and he'd just been sitting there waiting for me. I asked my first question. I'm waiting for his response to finish because I don't know when he's going to finish. And again, turns out he's been done for like 30 seconds. And as I go to ask my second question, they hang up on me. Ben makes a joke about it. I was like, oh, man. Shout out to Jerry from Triller. He was super nice. So I was like, we'll get you back in there. And so the whole time, I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? And so I decided as soon as I see my mic is unmuted, go, ask one question, don't follow up. Because when I start asking my question, he was still on my screen. Ben, Jake, they were still answering the last guy's question. It was so far back, but anyway, it is what it is. I think Ben had a good laugh about it. Such as working online, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the live chat very quickly. Shout out to our friends over at MMA Underground. Go subscribe there. They put a lot of fun alternative video essay stuff like that. They do great work. He says Evander Holyfield is fighting Kevin McBride. You're right. That does go in the losers category. I'm fine with Triller doing all this. It doesn't bother me. As someone who's didn't grow up a boxing fan, that doesn't pique my interest as much as seeing the MMA crossovers. I know there's people who have problems with all of these sort of celebrity crossovers. We just saw that Diplo is apparently going to be boxing, possibly against Tekashi 6ix9ine.
Yeah, I saw that.
There's insanity. Look, it's just its own thing, right? I think people are too emotional about it one way or the other. There's the combat sports purists who say, oh, this is disgusting, this is going to ruin our reputation. And then there's those who says, oh, this is actually going to boost and support boxing and MMA. And maybe I'm ingesting too much Luke Thomas information here, but I more so believe that it's just going to occupy its own pocket. There's always going to be some degree of crossover between fans. Like, entertainment and sports are my two industries. So for me, this sort of stuff really meshes perfectly. But I don't look at it as a win for either industry. It's just another pocket of entertainment. What do you make of the potential for these sort of celebrity crossovers and legends fights long term?
I think if I'm gonna be completely honest, for me personally, it's not really for me. I mean, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the way they go about promoting the fights. And, I mean, it's not to say that, going back to Jake Paul, it's not to say that he's not taking the sport seriously. We have a lot of people who have come out and are in his circle that have said that they've seen him train, they've seen him work, that he is taking the sport seriously. It's just the whole antics behind it. And I get it, it's part of his persona and he has to sell the fight, and it's part of his brand that he's built with YouTube along with his brother Logan. So I totally understand that aspect of it. It's not necessarily for me. Am I going to watch? I'm gonna have to admit yes, purely from a curiosity standpoint as well. Like
Don't worry, I already got my
I was
press code.
initially I was not. I'm gonna be honest with you. Initially, I was trying my hardest to say, you know what, I can't. I'm not gonna watch. I'm not gonna watch. But there's just too much intrigue there, especially with this, the week that we've had in terms of the fight buildup between Jake Paul and Ben Askren. I am curious to see more along the lines of Ben Askren. It's not to say that I don't know what Jake Paul can do in the ring. Who knows? He could bring some more skills to the table that we haven't seen. But I mean, he's fought, a YouTuber,
Yeah.
and Nate Robinson,
Who apparently did no training. Apparently Nate did not ever put on the gloves, which is just brain dead.
So to kind of judge him on that, it's tough. If he was facing an amateur and had some success and, beat the amateur, whether it was by decision or by, an emphatic knockout, then I think we can judge Jake Paul's skills a little bit more and, take it, not to take it more seriously, but, to put some validity behind it.
Yeah, it'll definitely answer more questions that we've had answered up to this point. And last thing I want to touch on regarding the losers, going back to 1SSS in the comment section, he says, Has Tatiana Suarez, recovered from her injuries? It's been a while. Boy, it has been a while. She signed with the UFC. I think her first fight was in 2015. We are now 2021. She's had about 5 UFC fights, all wins, and not against chumps. We're talking Nina Ansarov, unanimous decision, TKO'd Carla Esparza, tapped out Alexa Grasso. Like, if you're talking about a legit contender in that division, it is Tatiana Suarez. But at this point, unfortunately, it's weird because she's an afterthought, yet I think that division is shallow enough that we're still talking about her, and she probably could still be competitive, but we've really veered into the Hamzat Chimaev, Santiago Ponzinibbio territory where it's like, dude, just fight. She's 30 years old now. Not her fault at all that she's been riddled with injuries, but what do you think are the odds that Tatiana Suarez eventually cashes in on the expectations for her? Not to say she can't come back and win, but at this point, at this rate, do you think she's ever going to be a champion?
I definitely think there's a possibility there. And as we've seen in a lot of different divisions throughout the UFC, especially the women's division, it goes through ebbs and flows. We have points of time where we've seen the flyweights, that there's a lot of up and coming great flyweight fights to make. And the division, has some real competition there where there's some momentum and that we could see, a real champion come through that. In terms of Tatiana, and when we're looking at, strawweight, I definitely think there's a possibility there. I mean, again, typically what happens with, the women's division is we have a bunch of contenders lined up, and then there's kind of that lull period. I don't know if you would agree with that, but there's kind of that period where I don't want to say we're grasping at straws, but we're trying to find, some contenders. So for her to come back and have maybe an emphatic win, or, string 2 wins together, whether it's by decision or finish, I definitely think, she could be right there, and they can have Tatiana jump right in for a title shot. And again, bring more interest, a new contender into the division, because it seems to be, a few times it's happened throughout the divisions in the UFC and the women's divisions is we've have, a few of the same contenders. Not to say it's a bad thing, because such high level mixed martial artists, when you look at Rose, when you look at Wei Lee, there's some great fights to make. So I definitely think she's still right there no matter what.
Yes, and Joseph Boza points out she did earn a title shot when she beat the former Nina Ansarov, now Nina Nunes. But that was a long time ago. I wouldn't mind seeing Mackenzie Dern versus Tatiana Suarez. I feel like that would be interesting. But again, we'll see where she's at. Let's move on to the UFC Vegas 14 preview as we wrap this up. Quick reminder, folks, if you can, please hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, leave a like on this video. All that goes so far to helping our channel grow. Views have been ticking up, so thank you guys for your support. If you want to help us out even more, a little super chat donation warms the heart. Leave $1, leave 1,000. I have my preference, but it is all A-okay with me. All right, UFC Vegas 14. First question and biggest question for me. We have Robert Whittaker, Kelvin Gastelum, the fight that was supposed to be for the middleweight title until Robert Whittaker pulled out the day of and almost died as his body started shutting down. That's when we got Israel Adesanya versus Anderson Silva as a 3-round main event. Here we are, Gastelum stepping in on short notice for Paulo Costa. Kelvin at this point, I don't want to say an afterthought in the middleweight division. That's not quite fair, but a guy who every time you think he's on the brink of capitalizing, it's like one step forward, two steps back. He's coming off a win against Ian Heinisch that while others describe as impressive, I describe as meh, considering where Kelvin Gastelum was at one point in this division. I got to say, though, I think Kelvin Gastelum, at least heading into the fight, is without a doubt one of the biggest winners of the week. And I was saving until now to say so because we're in a position where he was far from sniffing a number one contenders fight, and here he is now slotted against, without a doubt, the top contender in Robert Whittaker. And if he wins this, I am very confident he is going to get the next UFC middleweight title shot, because in Kelvin Gastelum versus Kelvin Gastelum versus Israel Adesanya 2, we're talking about a rematch to what is my all-time favorite fight, without a doubt one of the best fights of the year. Could this have gone better for Kelvin, at least up until this point?
No, definitely not. I think this is best case scenario for him. You're talking about, coming off through, he was on the verge, I wouldn't say of being cut, but he's on the verge of getting to that spot where you're kind of in no man's land, if you know what I mean, where you're not necessarily fighting top contenders, but you're not necessarily, getting, you might be getting young and up and coming prospects, but you don't want to be in that position. You want to be, kind of somewhere where, your trajectory is going up, where you have that ability to fight top contenders. And when you go from fighting Israel Adesanya to Darren Till, and then to lose to Jack Hermanson and then to go to Ian Heinisch, no disrespect to anyone, a single one of those fighters, but you're talking about a level of competition that drops off a bit. And then you're you're getting to that scary point where you're in no man's land. So for him to come back from that, his back against the wall, 3 losses in a row, to win, like you said, it wasn't necessarily super impressive, but I thought the most impressive part was, again, coming through what he had gone through with 3 straight losses, right? It's not easy. There were some tough fights that he lost. The Darren Till one was close, although I did think Darren Till won. It was a close fight. So you're talking about someone who was right there against Israel Adesanya, like you said, in that, all-time classic fight. He was within, I wouldn't say inches of beating him, but he was right there. He had him hurt multiple times in an all-time back and forth fight. So for Kelvin Gastelum to be up against Robert Whittaker in a time where the middleweight division is completely wide open, is the best case scenario for him.
So let's matchmake this here, because Israel Adesanya appears to have a little bit of sway in terms of his own matchmaking. He has traditionally been very opposed to a rematch against Robert Whittaker. I think he thinks that he more than proved himself the first time around. In a sick way, I'm happy he lost the light heavyweight super fight against Jan Blachowicz, because now we can see middleweight resume as intended. We can see Glover get the title shot he deserves at 205. I think Izzy would be more interested in the Kelvin Gastelum rematch than the Robert Whittaker one, only because I think he has something to prove there. I think he has a lot of respect for how deep Kelvin Gastelum dragged him. Israel has been very, very nonchalant about Marvin Vettori. He doesn't seem to want that fight, and I think in a lot of people's minds, that might be the toughest fight for him right now. If Robert Whittaker wins, do you think the UFC puts enough pressure on Izzy to accept that fight? Because this whole time, Izzy has wanted Darren Till. That's not happening right now. Darren Till's out of action. Marvin Vettori is clearly in the running, and then you have this number one contenders fight. If Robert Whittaker beats Kelvin Gastelum, do you think that's more likely than the Marvin Vettori fight?
Yes, I do.
I think Marvin needs one more.
I agree. I was about to say that. It's no disrespect to Marvin, I think he's had a great run. He showed his complete game in the fight against, Kevin Holland. He showed, that he is a complete mixed martial artist. The added aspect of takedowns and wrestling to his game, I think, will pose kind of a different, not necessarily risk, but just a different element to a rematch with Adesanya. But I definitely think he needs a mark. Not to say he needs he kind of needs that. He does need a marquee name. I'm just going to go ahead and say he needs a marquee name. He needs someone that's right there. That's, him versus Robert Whitaker would be an ideal perfect matchup, but just based on matchmaking and scheduling, that obviously is not going to work out. So for him to, and again, it would have been better for him to fight Darren Till, but we obviously know he's out of action. So in terms of Marvin Vettori, I definitely think he needs that one more fight. But I think if Robert Whitaker wins, how can the UFC and how can Robert Whitaker and how can the division and Israel Adesanya itself kind of have
Yeah,
any
that's the fight.
legitimacy? That has to be the fight, right? And I know Israel Adesanya's talked about it many times, and it's a fight that because they're two of my, notice, like, full disclosure, it's two of my favorite fighters, Darren Till and Israel Adesanya. I would love to see that fight. And as a football fan at Anfield, even though I'm a Manchester United supporter, I would love to see that fight happen at a venue like Anfield at Liverpool, with the crowd screaming Sweet Caroline. The scenes of Liverpool would be amazing. But that's just not possible right now.
Yeah.
So I think, how could you deny Robert Whitaker that rematch, especially after everything he's been through and the run that he's going to be on if he gets the job done against Kelvin?
Last thing on this middleweight picture, and I've asked this question in other weeks, but it's a puzzle that I continue to struggle solving. If, without a doubt, the next fight is going to be Izzy versus the winner of Saturday night's main event, what do you do with Marvin Vettori next? Because I think one that makes a lot of sense on the surface would be Marvin Vettori versus Derek Brunson, just based off the fact they're both coming off of basically identical wins against Kevin Holland. I think you can answer a good question there about which of those guys is really next. But I think probably the better call in terms of moving on with the division in a meaningful way is some combination of Marvin Vettori and Derek Brunson versus Jared Cannonier and Paulo Costa, because it gives both guys the chance to move forward. Plus, I don't think Derek Brunson is going to get a shot against Izzy anytime soon. How would you matchmake, the top four guys outside of Izzy, Whitaker, and Gastelum?
Well, if I'm Marvin Vettori, I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, to be honest with you, because if the UFC is going to make Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whitaker, and Robert Whitaker again gets the job done against Kelvin Gastelum, you're in a position to be that backup fighter. Now, whether he takes that or not and he's willing to do that remains to be seen. But if I was him, I'm going to sit and wait, because you never know, injury, Adesanya can, he doesn't usually pull out, always shows up. And Whitaker, obviously has had some concerns and with injuries and with, last minute pull-ups, not to any fault of his own, but that's just the reality. If I'm Marvin Vettori, I wait. If I'm the UFC and I'm the matchmaker, I think a very intriguing matchup would be actually Marvin Vettori versus Paulo Costa. Someone, not to say that Jared Cannonier and Derek Brunson aren't deserving of fighting Marvin and aren't deserving, of that top 2-3 contender. But I think if you have Marvin Vettori versus Paulo Costa and you have Vettori winning, then that again kind of strengthens his case for and you can't disagree with him there. You know what I mean? There's no argument. Just like if Whitaker were to get the job done this weekend, you can't disagree with Marvin getting a title shot if he beats someone like Paulo Costa, who just fought Izzy for the belt, someone who has a win over Yoel Romero, who was on a run and who was a big puzzle at middleweight that Adesanya ended up solving. But I think that more is intriguing to me as a fan than having Marvin take on Brunson or Cannonier.
Yeah, one SS is suggesting Costa versus Till or Hermanson. I don't think Hermanson at this point. I think he's too far back. I still think, although Paulo Costa just got smushed by Izzy, so did Robert Whitaker. So I'm not prepared to say that Paulo Costa isn't actually the best or second best guy in that division. We just needed to play out a bit. I think, like you said, giving Marvin Vettori the Paulo Costa fight will give us a clearer picture of who each of those men are, as opposed to going all the way back to like a Jack Hermanson or even a Darren Till. Actual last thing on this, because I like where your head is at. There's a rhetoric I've been putting out a lot, which is in that Marvin Vettori Israel Adesanya fight, it was a split decision that people did score Vettori's way. Now, obviously, Adesanya's personality is one factor of what pushed him so fast, but it's crazy in hindsight to think that after that fight that was so close, we saw Izzy get such a big boost. We're talking Brad Tavares, Derek Brunson, Anderson Silva, Robert Whittaker, and we saw Marvin Vettori regulated down to like Cesar Ferreira. In hindsight, it's kind of insane how hard we made Marvin Vettori work to get back to this point. So I like the idea of a Paulo Costa fight because I really want to see. It's not pretty when Marvin fights. They're not as dominant as Izzy's, but I don't think that's to say that Marvin is worse than Izzy so much as it is that Marvin's style is just grueling and ugly compared to Adesanya's, sweet ninja skills.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like I said, it's not to say that the names of his opponents and his win streak isn't impressive. I mean, when you win 5 fights in a row and any division in the UFC, you're at the top of your game. You're in the cream of the crop. You're in the best fighting organization in the world. So when you have a 5-fight win streak in a division that doesn't have necessarily a clear title picture like we talked about, there is a case for Marvin to get that title shot, but he needs that one name to kind of just push him over the top. When you have a legitimate contender, they always have that one name, at least one name that kind of pushes them over the edge where you can't deny them that. And he might not want to admit that, but that's where I stand on that.
Fair enough. We're going to go to the comments for the last thing here. Shout out to Max Elkakui Holloway, back with us today. He says, Askren wins a boring decision and Gastelum Whittaker is fight of the year. I do like that contrast. You said you were going to watch Paul Askren. Does that mean you're not watching UFC, or you're going to hope that the main events end at different times? I'm pretty sure Whittaker Gastelum will not start until Askren.
I'm going to hope that they end on different times, because I'm going to be honest with you, my intrigue is obviously at the top end of the UFC card. It's not to say that it's, there's not some great fights that are, potential matchups or, potential great fights that we have on the card. But my focus obviously lies between that intriguing matchup between Robert Whittaker and Kelvin Gastelum. So I might have to break out the computer and the TV and kind of have them go simultaneously. But yeah, I don't want to admit it. I hate admitting it, but I am intrigued. I'm going to end up watching Paul versus
Full
Askren.
Disclosure, I will be watching Jake Paul versus Ben Askren instead. That is not because that's what I'd rather be doing with my Saturday night, but it is the weekend of my girlfriend's birthday, so I told her, whatever fight ends soonest is the fight that I will be covering over at Fightful.com. So you guys can check that there. Marcus, first and foremost, dude, very nice to see you again. We met at UFC Ottawa. Coincidentally ran into each other at UFC 244, Madison Square Garden. Jorge Masvidal, Nate Diaz didn't even tell me you were going to be there, and then you let me work from your hotel because they kicked us out of the arena at like 3 a.m, and we still had all the videos to get up.
With the time difference with the
bro. I'll send you a photo later. I don't think I ever sent it to you. I basically did not sleep that whole day. I got back on the flight and I looked like a corpse. I was the ugliest I've ever been. And I didn't know that was possible. Marcus, let the people know where they can find you, my dude.
On Twitter at Marcus Rebelo 94, covering everything, all sports. My Manchester United fandom seems to dominate my tweets these days, or my time these days, and Formula One. But obviously, I'm a huge fight fan, and I've covered the sport for since 2019. So time does fly. But yeah, they can find me there at Marcus Rebelo 94 on Twitter for some of my content.
Boom. There we go, guys. You can follow me on Twitter at Shaq_food. That's Shaq with a K. You see all the tags here on the nameplate. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we'll be back next week with another free one since it's UFC 261. But if you guys want to support what we do, please head over to FightfulSelect.com. That is our Patreon. You'll get this show every week, as well as a ton of breaking pro wrestling content from Sean Ross Sapp. We're looking to integrate more MMA stuff on there. Super cheap. I think it's like $5 a month. It's really a great way to show Fightful that you care about the show and it's worth investing in. So if you can do that, we appreciate it very much. At the very least, hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, leave a thumbs up on this video. Enjoy UFC Vegas 24. Enjoy Jake Paul versus Ben Askren if you're a masochist. We'll see you next Friday. Lots of videos coming out next week. Time for that crappy outro. So stay tuned for everything Fightful and so delightful. Peace out.